I keep a notebook now, the way some people keep a heartbeat out of stubbornness more than hope. My name is Daniel Voss, and before the world emptied out, I was an actuary, which is a polite way of saying I calculated how likely strangers were to die and charged them accordingly. I tell you this because it matters. It explains why, when the first reports came, I did not panic. I built a spreadsheet. I assigned probabilities. I was so proud of my cold head, right up until the morning my neighbor Mr. Avila walked into his own garden hose and stood there, swaying, while the water pooled around his shoes and he did not flinch at the cold. I watched him from my kitchen window with a coffee going lukewarm in my hand. His daughter, Renata, called to him from the porch. She was maybe 19, home from college because the campuses had closed. She said, "Dad, the way you'd test a step you weren't sure would hold." He turned toward her voice, and his face had the wrong arrangement to it, slack where it should have been tight, open where it should have been afraid. The coffee mug cracked against my tile floor. I don't remember dropping it. I want to be honest about the kind of man I was, because the people I'm going to tell you about deserve that honesty. I did not run to help Renata. I stood frozen, and in the 3 seconds I spent calculating the likelihood that Mr. Avila was contagious, she made a decision I would never have had the courage to make. She grabbed a snow shovel off the porch and put it between herself and her father, and she did not scream. She just walked backward, steady, talking to him the whole time in a low voice as if he were a horse that had spooked. That is how I met Renata Avila, through a window while her father died standing up. I bring this up because months later, when the 4 of us were starving in a stairwell beneath a city that no longer had a name worth saying, Renata would remind me that I'd watched and done nothing. She wasn't cruel about it. She was just precise. She remembered everything. And she filed people the way I used to file risk. The difference was, she did it to survive. And I'd done it to feel superior. By noon that first day, the street had 3 of them in it. By evening, 6. They were not fast, not the way films had promised. They were patient in the way water is patient, finding the low places, pooling at doors. The thing nobody tells you about the dead is that they don't hunt, they wait. And waiting is worse, because you can outrun a thing that chases you, but you can't outwait a thing that has nowhere else to be. I packed in 40 minutes. Documents, water, the protein bars I'd bought during a sale and never eaten. I'm telling you the small things, because the small things are what I clung to. When the large things became unthinkable, organized my socks. Before I left, my phone buzzed once more before the towers went quiet for good. It was a forwarded message, the kind that had been passed through a dozen hands, each one stripping it of its origin. A set of coordinates, a single line of text beneath them. Cold Harbor Facility, built to hold 200, doors still sealed. Whoever gets there first gets in. I should have deleted it. A rational man knows that a message everyone receives is a message everyone acts on, and a shelter everyone races toward becomes the most dangerous place on earth. I knew this. I had the math. And still I copied those numbers into my notebook in my careful actuary's hand, because hope is the one risk we never properly price. And I was about to learn exactly what it cost. I didn't make it out of the neighborhood alone, and that was the first thing the New World taught me, that solitude was a luxury for the already dead. Renata found me at the corner of Halstead and Fenn, where I'd stopped behind a stalled delivery truck to catch breath I didn't deserve. She had a backpack, the snow shovel, and a boy of about 10 gripping the hem of her jacket like it was the last solid thing in the universe. "You're the man from the window," she said. Not an accusation, a fact laid down flat. Daniel, I said. I know. She nodded at the boy. This is Teo. He's not mine. I found him in the laundromat. His mom told him to wait there, and she didn't come back. She said it without flinching, but her hand never left the boy's shoulder. And I understood that whatever Renata had been before, student, daughter, ordinary, she'd already become something that took inventory of orphans. Teo looked up at me. He had enormous dark eyes and the unnerving calm of a child who has decided crying won't help. Are you going to the harbor place? He asked. Renata has the numbers too. So the message had reached them. Of course it had. I pictured the city, every surviving phone lighting up with the same coordinates, every desperate person plotting the same vector toward the same door. And I felt the cold clarity I used to feel reviewing a doomed insurance policy. 200 spaces, a city of millions. The math wasn't survival math, it was lottery math, and the lottery was being run with knives. It's a trap, I told her. Not a deliberate one, a statistical one. Everyone goes there, so everyone dies there. Renata considered this with more seriousness than I expected. Where would you go instead? And I had no answer. That was the humiliating thing. I could tell you exactly why the smart move was wrong, but I couldn't name a smart move of my own. I'd spent my life identifying bad bets without ever placing a good one. The harbor, she decided, because at least it has walls. You can come or not. She started walking. Teo went with her without looking back at me, and the sight of that small loyalty did something to my chest that I can only describe as shame. I followed. I'd like to pretend it was a noble choice, that I went to protect them. The truth is, I followed because being alone in that silence had begun to feel like being buried. And the dead in the streets did not frighten me half as much as the dead in my own apartment. The way the rooms had gone quiet, with the absence of every future I'd assumed I'd have. We picked up Marcus before nightfall. He wasn't lost. He was waiting, sitting on the roof of a parked sedan with a hunting rifle across his knees, watching the intersection like a man who'd chosen it on purpose. He was older than me, gray at the temples, with the easy stillness of someone who'd been calm in bad rooms before. A paramedic, he told us later. He'd seen enough endings to recognize this one. You're heading to Cold Harbor, he said. Not a question. I'd offer to talk you out of it, but I'm going too. Better to die with company than alone, and better still to maybe not die at all. He looked at Teo, and something in his face softened by degrees. Kids shouldn't be on the street after dark. Come on. I know a route the crowds won't think of. That was Marcus all over. Though I didn't know it yet, generous in the moment, strategic underneath. He'd already done the same math I had. He just understood the part I'd missed. That the only way to beat a crowd to a door was to stop thinking like the crowd. We were 4 people now, bound by a string of numbers, walking toward the one place everyone alive still wanted. And only one of us was already planning what to do when we got there and found we were not the first. Marcus's route took us underground, through a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the rail yards. And it was there, in the dark, that we met the dead at close range for the first time. Up to that point, they'd been a phenomenon at distance figures in streets, shapes, and windows. The tunnel made them intimate. We heard it before we saw it. A wet, dragging rhythm, the scrape of something that had forgotten how to lift its own feet. Marcus killed his flashlight, and we stood pressed against the cold concrete, 4 heartbeats trying to be one silence. Teo's small hand found mine in the dark, and I held it. And I was astonished to find that the holding steadied me as much as it steadied him. The thing passed close enough that I could smell it, not rot, exactly, but something staler, like a room sealed for years. It had been a woman in a transit uniform. Her badge still caught what little light there was. She moved past us toward some destination only she understood. And Marcus waited a full minute after the dragging faded before he breathed again. "They follow sound," he murmured. "Not smell, not sight, not much. Sound. Remember that. It's the only rule that's held." Renata absorbed this the way she absorbed everything. Silently, permanently. I could see her recalibrating, and I realized she'd been keeping her own ledger of how the world worked now, just as I once kept mine of how it used to. We were not so different, she and I. We were both people who survived by understanding. The difference was that her understanding came with a backbone, and mine came with an excuse. We surfaced near the old harbor district as the sky went the color of a bruise. And there, finally, was Cold Harbor Facility. It was not what the message had promised. The coordinates had conjured, in my imagination, something military and clean. What stood before us was a squat concrete structure half sunk into a hillside, its single visible door a slab of riveted steel set with a keypad and a small reinforced window. It had the look of a Cold War relic, a place built by frightened men in a frightened decade and then forgotten. 200 spaces, the message had said. Looking at it, I doubted it could hold 50. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was the people. They were already there. Maybe 30 of them, clustered before the door in the gray light. And they were not waiting peacefully. They were a knot of voices and shoving shoulders. And at the center of the knot stood a man on the steps with his arms raised. And the way the others angled toward him told me everything. The door was sealed. Someone had figured out it could only be opened from inside, and the man on the steps was the one who claimed to know how to get in. "That's the problem," Marcus said quietly, echoing my thought. Everyone wanted the same bunker. There was only ever going to be one of those. He nodded toward the crowd. "And the door isn't the obstacle. They are." Renata pulled Teo closer. "What do we do?" I looked at the crowd, at the desperate arithmetic of it, 30 people. One door, a man selling the only thing more dangerous than a weapon, which is a promise. And the old instinct woke in me. The cold and useful and shameful instinct. The one thing I was genuinely good at. I could read a room of frightened people the way I'd once read mortality tables. I knew, looking at them, exactly how this would go. And I knew that getting through that door would not be a question of strength or speed. It would be a question of who among us was willing to do the math out loud, and then act on it before anyone else found the courage. I just didn't yet know it would be me. The man on the steps called himself Elias Crane, and he had the voice of someone who'd been waiting his whole life for an audience this desperate. He told the crowd he was an engineer, that he'd worked on facilities like this one, that the keypad was a decoy, and the real entry was a sequence, and that he would share it, in time, with the people he judged worthy of sharing the space inside. It was a brilliant lie, if it was a lie. He'd made himself the gate. Not the door was just steel. Him. To get in, you had to get past Elias. And Elias had already begun the work of dividing 30 strangers into the chosen and the surplus. "He's lying," Renata said under her breath. "Nobody talks like that if they actually know how to open a door. They just open it." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe he knows exactly how, and he's spinning it out because the moment that door opens, he loses his power. Right now he's a king. After, he's just one more body in a crowded room." I watched Elias work the group. He had 2 men beside him who'd clearly attached themselves to his authority, big, blunt-faced men who'd found in the apocalypse a permission they'd always wanted. Muscle. Elias had assembled a court in the span of an afternoon. The man understood power the way I understood numbers, instinctively, completely, and without much conscience. Then the situation changed, the way situations did now, all at once and from the wrong direction. Someone in the crowd screamed, and it wasn't fear of Elias. A woman at the edge of the group had begun to convulse, and the people around her scrambled back, and I understood with sick certainty that she'd been bitten before she arrived and had hidden it, the way you'd hide a winning ticket, because a wound was a death sentence in a crowd this scared. She went down. She came back up wrong. And then there were not 30 people and 1 door. There were 30 people, 1 door, and a brand new dead thing in the middle of them, drawn to the sudden chorus of their panic. Harstwoodworry chaos has a sound. It's not one scream, it's the moment 100 small sounds stop coordinating. And Marcus's single rule, they follow sound, became the most important sentence anyone had ever said to me. The crowd was making itself into a beacon. And from the surrounding streets, from the alleys and the broken storefronts, the patient pooling dead began to answer. Now, Marcus said. He didn't shout it. He said it to us, just us. 4 people on the edge of a disaster. Everyone's looking at the wrong thing. Move. We moved. Not toward the door, Marcus pulled us sideways. Toward the hillside. Toward a ventilation housing he'd clocked the moment we arrived. A paramedic's eye for the second exit, the back way. The thing nobody panicking ever sees. Renata had Teo against her chest. I had the rifle Marcus pressed into my hands because his own were full of the boy's spare weight when Teo's legs gave out. Behind us, Elias was still on his steps, still trying to command, his voice climbing into a register that had stopped being authority and started being terror. The crowd he'd organized was dissolving into the thing all crowds become, when the math turns against them, a single animal, screaming, devouring its own edges. I looked back once. I shouldn't have. Elias caught my eye across that boiling chaos. And in his face, I saw not a king and not a victim, but a fellow calculator, a man who'd just realized his equation had a variable he'd forgotten to price. He'd built his power on the assumption that the door was the only way in. And we were already climbing toward the proof that it wasn't. He started toward us, shoving through his own collapsing kingdom. And I understood that whatever came next, Elias Crane would not let us reach that bunker without him. The ventilation housing was rusted half shut, and it took all 3 adults to wrench it open while Teo kept watch, calling out the positions of the dead in a whisper that no child should have to learn to use. Marcus had been right. It was a service shaft, a maintenance access that the original builders had installed and the message makers had never known about. The crowd at the front door was fighting over a lock. We'd found a window left open by 50 years of neglect. But Elias had seen us. As Marcus lowered Teo into the dark shaft, I heard the scrabble of someone climbing the hillside behind us, and I turned with the rifle raised, my hands shaking so badly that the barrel drew small, frantic circles in the air. It wasn't Elias. It was one of his men, the larger of the 2. And he came at me not with a weapon, but with the pure animal need of a man who just watched his certainty die in a crowd. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to get past me to the shaft, to the way in, and that I would learn was the same thing. In the new world, the distance between I need to live and you need to die had collapsed to nothing. I didn't shoot him. I want that on the record, in my careful hand. I couldn't. The actuary in me had calculated 1,000 deaths, but had never authored one. Instead, I did the cowardly, lucky thing. I stepped aside, and his own momentum carried him past me toward the open shaft. And Marcus, already inside, did what I couldn't. There was a sound I won't describe. The man did not climb down after us. Renata looked at me. She didn't say you froze. She didn't have to. She'd added it to the ledger. We descended into the facility through ductwork that smelled of decades in dead air, and we dropped at last into a corridor lit by emergency lighting that still, impossibly, worked a thin red glow that turned every face into something from a nightmare. The bunker was real. The walls were real. And it was, as I'd suspected, far smaller than the message had promised. A central hub, a few branching corridors, a water reclamation system ticking somewhere in the walls, and a sense of profound, sealed silence. 200 spaces, Marcus said, turning slowly. Whoever wrote that message was either lying or hoping. This holds maybe 40, maybe. 40's enough, Renata said. There's 4 of us. That was the moment I should have felt relief. We'd done it. We'd reached the impossible door by ignoring the door entirely. We were inside, and the dead were outside, and the desperate crowd was outside, and Elias was outside. For one breath, the math was finally on our side. Then Teo said, in his small, flat voice, "There's a light on down there." Someone left a light on. He pointed down the longest corridor, where a doorway glowed a different color than the rest, not emergency red, but warm white, electric and deliberate. The kind of light a person turns on, the kind of light that means a person is home. We were not the first. Marcus and I exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. The crowd at the front door had been fighting to get into a bunker that someone already lived in. Elias had been selling entry to a house that already had an owner. And we, clever, lucky us, had found the back way into another person's only sanctuary. The one place in a dead world they had to defend or die. "Hello?" The voice came from the lit doorway before any of us could decide what to do. A woman's voice, steady, unsurprised, almost weary. "I've been watching you on the cameras since the vent. There are cameras everywhere in here. So before anyone does anything stupid, and people always do something stupid, I want you to know that I know exactly how many of you there are, exactly where you are, and exactly how this room works. You don't." Her name was Sister Agnes, though she told us later she'd stopped being a sister long before the world ended. That she'd left the order over a disagreement about mercy that she never fully explained. She was perhaps 60, small and dense as a closed fist. And she'd been living in Cold Harbor for 3 weeks before we fell out of her ceiling. She had not built the place. She'd found it the same way we had, through a message, through luck, through getting there first. The difference was she'd gotten there alone. And she'd had 3 weeks to learn that being alone in a fortress was its own kind of death sentence. "I should be terrified of you," she said, sitting across from us in the central hub, her hands folded as if in a habit she'd never quite broken. 4 strangers, 2 of them armed, in my walls. By every sensible rule, I should have sealed you in the corridor and waited you out. She looked at Teo, who'd fallen asleep against Renata's side the moment he felt safe enough to. "But I've spent 3 weeks learning that a bunker without people in it is just a very strong coffin. So I'm going to make you an offer instead." The offer was simple and brutal in its honesty. She knew the facility. She knew where the food was rationed, how the water system worked, which doors held and which didn't, and the actual capacity of the air scrubbers, which was not 200, not 40, but closer to a dozen for any length of time. She would share all of it. In exchange, she wanted one thing: that we agree, all of us, on how decisions would be made before we ever needed to make a hard one. Because the hard ones come, she said, and groups that decide the rules during the emergency tear themselves apart. I've watched it happen. From the outside, but I watched. Marcus respected her immediately. I could see it. Renata watched her the way she watched everyone, ledger open. And I felt something I hadn't felt since the world turned, which was the comfort of being in a room with someone who thought in systems. Agnes wasn't a believer in fate. She was a believer in process. She'd have made a fine actuary. We talked through the night, the red and white lights blending in the corridor between us. And we built something. Not a government, there were 5 of us, 6 counting the sleeping boy. A compact. Decisions affecting everyone would be made by everyone. No single person held the keys, literal or otherwise. Agnes insisted on this most fiercely of all. And only later did I understand why. She'd already had absolute power here. The power of the one who got there first. And she'd learned that holding it had nearly broken her. She wanted to give it away before it made her into something she'd recognize from the wrong side of a confessional. There's a problem, though, Marcus said, as the artificial dawn of the emergency lights cycled brighter. The crowd outside. Elias. The dead the panic drew in. They're not going to disperse. They know there's a door. Eventually one of them, Elias, probably finds the vent we used. Agnes nodded slowly. I can seal the vent. I should have sealed it weeks ago. But the moment I do, we've made a choice. She let the sentence hang. What choice? Renata asked. That nobody else gets in, Agnes said. Ever. Right now, that vent is the only mercy this place has left to offer the people up there. Seal it, and we've decided that the 12 of us, or however many we are, matter more than every other living soul who wanted this exact same door. She looked at each of us in turn. I left the order over a question about mercy. It seems the question followed me down here. So I'll put it to the group, since that's how he said we'd do things. Do we seal the door and live? Or do we keep it open and share what little we have until there's nothing left to share and probably die for it? The vote split us, and the fracture lines were not where I expected them to be. Marcus wanted to seal it. He was a paramedic, a triage man to his bones. And triage is the science of accepting that you cannot save everyone, and that pretending otherwise kills the people you could have saved. I have spent 20 years, he said, deciding who gets the last bed. The answer is never everyone. The answer is the people in front of you. He gestured at the ceiling, at the unseen crowd, are not in front of me anymore. You are. Teo is. I seal it. Agnes, who had raised the question, surprised us all by voting to keep it open, at least for a time. I didn't ask because I knew the answer, she said. I asked because I'm afraid of what I become if I stop asking. Renata was the one I'd have bet on for mercy she'd carried an orphan across a dead city, but she voted to seal it. And she did it without softness. I love that you can afford the question, she told Agnes, not unkindly. I can't. I've got a kid asleep on my arm whose mother told him to wait in a laundromat and never came back. I don't get to gamble his life on whether I'm a good person. Seal it. Which left me, the deciding vote, the way it always seems to come down, to the person least equipped to cast it. And here is where I have to tell you the truth, even though it doesn't make me look the way I'd like. I voted to keep it open, not out of mercy. I want to be clear about that, because Renata accused me of cowardice later, and she was righter than she knew. I voted to keep it open because I was afraid of being the kind of man who sealed a door. I'd watched Mr. Avila die from a window and done nothing, and I'd let Marcus do the thing at the vent that I couldn't do. And I'd built a whole life out of calculating other people's deaths without ever taking responsibility for one. Keeping the door open let me feel merciful without doing anything. It was the most actuarial vote imaginable. I priced my own conscience and paid the cheapest possible premium. So we deadlocked, 2 and 2, with Agnes's vote making it the strange shape it was. And the compact we'd built the night before had its first stress test before the lights had even fully cycled. We were a democracy of 5 who couldn't agree on whether to be alive. The decision got made for us, the way the important ones do. Teo woke. He'd heard everything. Children always hear more than you think. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the 4 arguing adults and said, "If you leave it open, my mom could find it. She might still be out there. She might come." The room went silent, and I watched Renata's face do something I'd never seen it do: break, just for an instant, the ledger snapping shut. Because she knew, the way we all knew, that Teo's mother was not coming, that she'd been gone for weeks, that the boy was holding the door open in his heart the way I was holding it open with my vote, for reasons that had nothing to do with strangers and everything to do with the people we'd already failed. "Okay," Renata said, very quietly to the boy. "We'll leave it a little longer, for your mom." And that was the lie that kept the door open. Not mercy, not principle. A lie told to a child, agreed to by 4 adults who all knew better, because every one of us needed it to be true, that the people we'd lost might still walk back through some open door if we only had the courage not to close it. For 4 days, the open door cost us nothing, and I let myself believe we'd been right. We fell into rhythms. Agnes taught us the facility's bones, the water system that pulled from a deep aquifer, the scrubbers that cleaned our air on a schedule she'd memorized, the storeroom with its dwindling but real supply of preserved food. Marcus turned a closet into a clinic. Renata and Teo mapped the corridors into a game, and for an hour each day, the boy got to be a boy, his laughter strange and bright against the concrete. I did the thing I was good at. I counted. I built us a model how long the food would last at 5 mouths, at 8, at 12. I calculated the water margin, the air margin, the failure points. And the model told me, in its cold, honest way, what none of us wanted to hear: that the bunker could keep a small number alive for a long time, or a large number alive for a very short time, and that there was no arrangement of mercy that bent that curve. Math doesn't negotiate. I'd built my whole life on that fact, and now it was building my death. On the 5th day, the door cost us everything. They came through the vent we hadn't sealed, the same path we'd used, found at last by someone clever enough and desperate enough. Not the dead. The dead can't climb ductwork. Elias Crane. He came down out of the ceiling the way we had, and he did not come alone, and he did not come asking. He had the second of his 2 men with him, and 3 other survivors from the crowd, the ones ruthless enough to have lived through the front door disaster. 5 people, where we were 5 and a child. And Elias, dropping into our corridor with a pistol in his hand and that terrible patient smile on his face, understood our situation faster than we did. "You left the door open," he said, delighted, almost grateful. "Oh, all this concrete, all these locks, and you left me a way in because you couldn't stand to close it. I've been watching the vent for 2 days. I knew one of you would be sentimental." His eyes found Teo, and his smile widened. And I felt something in me that I'd never felt before, a pure, clean hatred that had no calculation in it at all. Sentiment. It's the most expensive thing left in the world. Agnes stepped forward, hands raised, the old habit of mediation. "There's room," she began. "If we ration carefully, if we—" "I'm not here to share." Elias said almost gently. I watched a crowd tear itself apart over the idea of sharing. Sharing is what people say when they haven't yet understood the numbers. He looked at me then, directly, as if he'd read my notebook, as if he knew exactly what my model said. Your friend here knows. I can see it on his face. He's already done the math. Tell them, calculator. Tell them how many this box really holds for the long run. And every face in that corridor turned to me. Renata, Marcus, Agnes, Teo. The people I'd fallen out of the ceiling with, the strangers who'd become the only world I had left. They looked at me to deny it. I couldn't, because Elias was right. My model said the same thing his instinct did. The bunker held a few, for a long time, or many, for no time at all. The only difference between Elias and me was that he'd say it out loud and act on it, and I'd whisper it to a notebook and let other people pay the cost. We were the same equation. He was just willing to solve it. Tell them, Elias said again. And God help me, the number was already on my tongue. I didn't say the number. That's the one thing, in all of this, that I can point to and say there. That was me choosing. Elias wanted me to hand him the math like a weapon, to turn my cold competence into the justification for whatever he'd already decided to do. And I looked at Teo's enormous dark eyes, and I thought about the laundromat, and I said the only true thing I'd said in years. The number doesn't tell you who, I said. It only tells you how many. The who isn't math. That's the part you keep getting wrong. It wasn't much, but it broke something in the moment. A hairline crack in the certainty Elias had walked in with. He'd expected an Ally 1 calculator recognizing another, and instead I'd refused to be his mirror. His smile faltered, and in that half-second of faltering, Marcus moved. I won't pretend it was clean. It wasn't. Marcus had spent 20 years deciding who got the last bed, and now he made his decision with the only tools the corridor offered. The pistol went off into the ceiling, into concrete. A sound so enormous in that sealed space that the world went to ringing silence. When the ringing faded, Elias was on the ground, and Marcus had the gun. And one of Elias's men was down and not getting up. And the rest had frozen in the way that people freeze when the future they'd planned for evaporates in an instant. Agnes was already moving toward the wounded, both of them, Elias's man and the others, because that was who Agnes was. The woman who'd left her order over a question about mercy and had clearly never resolved it. Marcus stood over Elias with the gun, breathing hard, and I watched the paramedic war with the triage man inside him. You don't have to, Agnes said to Marcus, very quietly. It's over. You don't have to. It's never over, Marcus said. But he didn't pull the trigger. He stepped back, and he let Agnes do her work. And Elias, bleeding from the shoulder, his certainty gone, suddenly just a frightened man in a concrete room, looked up at all of us with an expression I'll never forget. It was almost relief. As if losing had freed him from being the kind of man who had to win. We didn't kill them. We could have. The math again said we should 5 more mouths, the curve bending toward all our deaths. But Renata, of all people, the one who'd voted to seal the door, was the one who said no. If we do that, she said, then the bunker isn't worth surviving in. Then we're just Elias with better luck. She looked at me. The who isn't math. He's right. She nodded at me, and it was the first time she'd agreed with me about anything, and it cost her something to do it. So we made a smaller, sadder compact. Elias and his people could stay, under terms disarmed, watched, integrated slowly. Agnes wanted it. Renata allowed it. Marcus accepted it with the grim patience of a man who knows he'll probably regret a mercy and chooses it anyway. And me? I'd stopped pretending my vote was the moral one. I just wanted, for once, to be on the side of the people who let strangers live. That night, the bunker held 10 people and a boy, and my model said we had maybe 2 months before the curve turned cruel. 2 months of food, of water, of air, of pretending that the arithmetic of mercy could be solved by good intentions. Elias slept under guard. Teo slept under Renata's arm, and I lay awake doing the only thing I knew how to do, counting down a number that no amount of kindness could make larger, and understanding for the first time that surviving the dead had only ever been the easy part. Elias healed slowly, and as he healed, he did the most dangerous thing a defeated man can do. He became useful. He really had been an engineer, that part wasn't a lie. He understood the facility systems better than Agnes, found inefficiencies in the water reclamation, coaxed another 4% out of the air scrubbers, extended my grim timeline by a few precious weeks. He worked without complaint, and he talked to Teo gently. And slowly the others began to forget what he'd been when he dropped out of our ceiling. I didn't forget. Neither did Renata. We'd both built our survival on reading people, and we both saw the same thing. Elias hadn't changed. He'd adapted. The man who'd made himself the gate at the front door, who'd turned 30 strangers into a kingdom in an afternoon, was not a man who'd been cured of wanting power by getting shot. He was a man who'd learned that the front door approach had failed, and was patiently, intelligently, looking for the back way in. "He's recruiting," Renata told me one night in the storeroom, where we'd both ended up doing inventory we didn't trust to anyone else. Quietly, the two who came with him, obviously, but also Dahlia, the woman from the front door crowd. He fixes things for people. He listens to them. He's building the same thing he had up top, just slower, so we won't see the walls going up. "I see them," I said. "I know you do." She set down a can, met my eyes. "That's why I'm telling you. You and I are the only ones who think like he does. Marcus is a good man, but he thinks the problem ended when he took the gun. Agnes thinks the problem is her own soul. They don't see that the real fight in here was never going to be against the dead. It's against whoever wants to own the living." She was right, and her rightness frightened me, because it meant the bunker, the prize everyone had died to reach, the one door in a dead city, had not solved the human problem. It had concentrated it. Up top, in the open, a man like Elias could only gather as many followers as he could feed and protect in the chaos. Down here, in the sealed dark, with finite air and a single exit, control of the bunker meant control of everything. Whoever held Cold Harbor held the only future on offer. And there was, as the title of every desperate person's hope had promised, only one of it. "What do we do?" I asked her. And I noticed I'd started asking her that, the way Teo had started gripping my hand in the dark. She'd become the person I checked my fear against. Renata was quiet for a long moment. "Agnes built us a compact," she said. "Everyone decides together. Elias is going to use that against us. He'll get enough people on his side that the votes go his way, and then he'll have taken the bunker by the rules we wrote to keep it fair. That's what people like him do. They don't break the system, they win it. So we change the rules? No." Her jaw set. "Then we're no better than him. And Agnes is right that the bunker stops being worth surviving in. We don't beat him by becoming him." She looked at me with something that wasn't quite trust, but was reaching toward it. "We beat him by being the thing he can't understand. He thinks everyone's running the same equation. He is self-interest, all the way down. He thinks you're his mirror. She almost smiled. Prove him wrong. That's the only move we've got that he won't see coming, because he doesn't believe it exists. The crisis came faster than even Renata predicted, and it came wearing the face of an accident. A water line failed one of the deep pump connections, the kind of catastrophic systems failure that Agnes had always feared, and that Elias, conveniently, was the only one with the expertise to repair. For 18 hours we had no water flow. And in those 18 hours, Elias did exactly what Renata had said he would. He didn't seize power. He let us hand it to him. He surveyed the damage, gathered us all in the central hub, and explained calmly, reasonably, with diagrams, that the repair would require rationing, restricted movement to conserve the reserve supply, and a single coordinating authority to manage the crisis. Himself, temporarily, for everyone's safety. It's just sense, Dahlia said, and 3 others nodded, and I watched the compact Agnes had built begin to dissolve, not through violence, but through reasonableness, which is how these things always actually happen. And here is the part I'm least proud of and most grateful for, both at once. I had the numbers. I'd been quietly running Elias's repair plan against the actual system specs Agnes had taught me, and I'd found the lie buried in his diagrams. The repair didn't require central authority. It didn't require restricted movement. Those were control mechanisms dressed as engineering. The water line could be fixed in a way that kept everyone free, and Elias knew it. And he'd chosen the version that made him king. I could prove it, I had the math. But proving it meant standing up. It meant being the man who acted, not the man who calculated and let others carry the weight. It meant becoming finally the opposite of who I'd been at my kitchen window, watching Mr. Avila die. So I stood up. That's not true, I said, and my voice shook, and I let it shake, because a steady voice would have sounded like I was performing, and I wasn't. I can show you. The repair Elias is describing needs all of us moving freely to reach the secondary valves. His plan locks us in our quarters and routes everything through him, and that's not for the water, it's for him. I've run it. Here. I held up my notebook, my careful actuary's hand filling page after page. I've spent my whole life calculating things and never doing anything about them. I'm doing something now. He's lying to you. And the proof is in the numbers. And the numbers don't have a side. The room turned. Not all at once, that's not how trust works. But Agnes came to look at my pages, and then Marcus, and then devastatingly for Elias, Dahlia. Because the thing about a man who wins by being the smartest in the room is that he can't survive someone smarter being honest. Elias had built his power on the assumption that I was his mirror, that the only other calculator would either join him or stay silent. He'd never priced the possibility that I'd use the math against the math. Elias looked at me across the hub, and the patient smile was gone. And what replaced it was the closest thing to respect I ever saw from him. You finally did it, he said quietly, just to me, under the noise of the others examining my numbers. You stopped watching. He shook his head, almost rueful. Shame. We'd have run this place beautifully, you and I. That's the difference between us, I said. You wanted to run it. I just want everyone to get to live in it. We fixed the water line, the freeway. It took longer. It worked. And Elias's quiet kingdom, the walls he'd been building so patiently, came down not in a battle, but in a single afternoon of a frightened man, choosing for the first time to act. Stripped of his momentum, Elias did not rage. That was the unsettling thing about him. He was never theatrical, never the villain who monologues himself into a corner. He simply recalculated. And a few nights after the water crisis, he came to me alone in the storeroom, unarmed, hands open, and made his final offer. "There's something none of you have factored," he said. "The dead at the front door haven't dispersed. They've grown. The sound of that first crowd, then the gunshots, then weeks of people living and making noise in here, it's drawn them. There's a herd up there now, Daniel. Hundreds. I saw it through the vent before I came down the last time. The front door is sealed, but it won't hold forever against that kind of mass. And when it goes, this whole compact of yours about who deserves to live becomes very academic." I waited. With Elias, there was always a second clause. "I know a way out," he said. "Not in out. A secondary egress, deep service tunnel, comes up past the harbor, past the herd. I found it in the schematics weeks ago and told no one, because a way out is the most valuable thing in a trap, and I wasn't going to give it away for free." He leaned in. "I'll share it. With a few of us. The strong ones. We leave before the front door fails, we travel light, we find somewhere new. And we don't repeat the mistake of inviting everyone into a box too small to hold them." He paused. "Your model already told you this place is dying on a timeline. I'm offering you the one thing math can't give you. An exit." And I understood, finally, the full shape of the man. He wasn't evil. He was just a survivor who decided that survival was the only value. That the who really was just math after all. That you saved the strong and shed the weak and called it sense. He was what I might have become if I'd ever found the nerve to act on my own cold calculations. He was my reflection, exactly as he'd always claimed. And he was offering to let me finally be the man my numbers had always implied I was. "Who doesn't make the cut?" I asked. "In your version, who do we leave?" He didn't flinch. "The boy slows us down. The sister won't leave anyone, so she stays. The paramedic's loyal to them, so he stays. The Avila girl." He tilted his head, assessing. "She's strong. She could come. But she won't leave the boy, so she stays too." He spread his hands. "You see? It works out cleanly. It's just you and me, and a few of mine. The ones who understand." I looked at him for a long time. And I thought about Teo's hand in mine. In the dark tunnel, the way the holding had steadied me. I thought about Renata saying the who isn't math. I thought about Agnes. And her unresolved question. And Marcus and his last bed. "No," I said. "I'm staying with the people too sentimental to leave each other. Turns out that's who I want to die next to, if it comes to that." I held his gaze. "And you're going to tell all of us about that exit. Not a few, all. Because the herd's coming, whether we deserve to escape it or not. And the who isn't yours to decide. Elias didn't tell us about the exit. I told them every word of his offer, the secondary egress, the herd massing at the front door, all of it, laid out in the central hub for the whole bunker to hear. It was the only weapon I had against a man who traded in secrets. I made the secret public. Information that everyone has cannot be sold by anyone. The herd was real. Agnes confirmed it on the cameras. The front door feed showed a sea of slow bodies pressed against the hillside, drawn by months of accumulated sound, swaying in that terrible patient tide. The steel door that had been our salvation was now the only thing between us and a mass that no walls were built to hold indefinitely. My model had been counting down food and water. It had never thought to count the dead. We had a choice, and for once we made it the way Agnes had always wanted, together, fully, with all the facts on the table. We could stay sealed and gamble that the front door held and the herd eventually dispersed. Or we could use Elias's exit, the deep service tunnel, and leave the only sanctuary any of us had found, walking back into a dead world with nothing but each other. It was Teo who tipped it again. He'd grown in his weeks underground, not taller, but older in the eyes, the way children age in catastrophes. "If we stay," he said, "we're just waiting. I'm tired of waiting. My mom told me to wait, and she never came. I don't want to wait for the door anymore." He looked at Renata. "I want to go find somewhere. With everybody. All of us. All of us." The boy had absorbed the only lesson that mattered, the one I'd taken 30 years and an apocalypse to learn. The who isn't math. You don't shed the weak to save the strong. You carry each other, or the surviving isn't worth the breath it takes. We planned the exit for everyone. 10 people and a boy. Through a deep tunnel, past a herd, into the unknown. Elias, to his credit or his calculation, helped. He knew the schematics. And a way out shared was a way out he could still travel. I think some part of him was relieved to have lost. Power had been his whole equation, and losing it left him, for the first time, free to just be a man trying to live, which is a smaller and more bearable thing to be. We went on a night that meant nothing, because all nights meant nothing now. Agnes sealed the inner doors behind us as we descended into the service tunnel, sealing the bunker at last, the way she'd talked about that first night, but choosing now to seal it as we left rather than to trap others out. The mercy question had finally found its answer. You don't hoard the sanctuary. You share what you can, and then you let it go. The tunnel was long and black, and it smelled of the deep earth. Marcus led with the rifle, then Agnes, then the others, then Renata and Teo, with Elias and me at the rear. The 2 calculators bringing up the back, the way we'd both spent our lives doing, watching, assessing, last to commit. We could hear it the whole way, above us and to the sides. The muffled shuffle of the herd through the rock, hundreds of dead pressing toward a door we'd just abandoned, drawn to a sound and a heat that was already leaving. "They'll break the front door eventually," Elias murmured, "and find an empty box." "Good," I said. "Let them have it. We never really wanted the bunker. We wanted to live. We just got the 2 confused, same as everyone." He almost laughed. "There it is," he said. "The thing I could never afford to understand." And we climbed toward a faint gray promise of open air. 11 people who had wanted the same impossible door, walking away from it together, because the only thing worth surviving for had never been behind it. We surfaced into a dawn the color of ash, half a mile past the harbor, past the herd, into a world that did not care that we had survived it. The tunnel let us out in a culvert beneath an overpass, and we came up blinking into a light none of us had seen in weeks. And the sheer width of the sky, after all that concrete, made Teo cry, not from fear, for once, but from the overwhelming size of being free. We were not safe. I want to be honest about that, because the temptation of an ending is to pretend it ties off. The dead were still everywhere. The herd was behind us, the future ahead of us, the food in our packs measured in days, not months. My model would have given us terrible odds. But I'd stopped trusting my model, or rather, I'd learned what it was actually for. It could tell me how many and how long. It could never tell me whether the surviving was worth it. Only the people walking beside me could answer that. And they had, every time, by choosing each other over the cold sense of the numbers. We lost someone in the first week after. I won't dress it up. One of Elias's men, the survivor named Dahlia, the herd, a moment of noise at the wrong time. The world stayed exactly as lethal as it had always been. But here is what had changed. When she fell, we grieved her. We stopped at real risk, and we grieved because Agnes insisted, because the who mattered, because a group that doesn't mourn its dead has already become the thing that it's running from. Marcus, the triage man, the one who'd spent 20 years deciding who got the last bed, was the one who knelt longest. "I'm tired of doing the math," he told me. "I want to do the other thing now, whatever the other thing is." "Mercy," Agnes said. "The other thing is mercy. It's expensive. We can afford a little." Elias stayed with us. That surprised everyone, including, I think, Elias. He could have peeled off at any point, taken his expertise and his cold equations, and built another kingdom somewhere, with people who'd kneel. He didn't. I asked him why once, weeks on, when we'd found a defensible place, not a bunker, never again a bunker, but a working farm on high ground, with sight lines and exits and room to breathe. He thought about it a long time. "Because down there, I finally lost a game I'd never lost before," he said. "And losing it to a man who used honesty against me, it made me curious. I want to see if your way works, the carrying everyone way. I don't believe it does. The math says it can't." He looked out over the fields where Teo was teaching the younger survivors a game with stones. "But I've been wrong about exactly one thing in my life, and it was the most important thing. And I'd like to be around to find out if I was wrong about more." I understood him. I'd been him, in the small, cowardly way, the watcher at the window. We were two men who'd spent our lives certain that people were just equations to solve. And we'd both been broken of it by the same discovery that the equation has a term you can't measure. The stubborn, unprofitable fact that human beings will carry each other into the dark for no good reason the numbers can find. It is the one variable I never learned to price. I've stopped trying. Some things you're not supposed to put a number on. That's the whole lesson. That's the only thing I know now that I didn't know at my kitchen window, watching a man die because I was too busy calculating to move. I still keep the notebook, the same careful hand, though the calculations have changed. I no longer count how long the food lasts or how many the shelter holds. I count birthdays. Teo turned 11 on the farm, and we'd saved a can of peaches for a year to mark it. And watching him eat them, I understood I'd finally found a number worth tracking. Everyone wanted the same bunker. There was only one problem, and I spent the whole descent thinking the problem was that there was only one bunker. I was wrong, the way I'd been wrong about everything that mattered. The problem was never scarcity. The problem was that we'd all confused the shelter for the surviving, the walls for the living, the door for the people we'd lost on the other side of it. I left a man die from a window once, because I was too busy pricing his death to reach for his life. I don't do that anymore. When someone falls now, I move first and calculate never. It's the most irrational thing I've ever done, and the only thing I've ever done that felt like being a person instead of a ledger. The dead are still out there. So are we. For now, that's enough arithmetic for me.